What if the greatest victory came without a fight? What if silence became the loudest weapon? This is the story of faith that brought down walls. Moses was gone, and a new leader stood at the edge of destiny. Joshua, chosen but tested. Before him stood the Jordan, raging, impossible. But when faith stepped forward, the waters obeyed. And beyond the river stood Jericho, a city sealed tight. Walls too strong for men, but not for God. Then came the command, unexpected, unimaginable. March in silence. Day after day, step after step. No victory in sight. Only obedience. Doubt whispered, but faith answered. Then came the seventh day. 7 times around. 7 circles of belief. 7 moments of surrender. And then, shout! Not because the walls had fallen, but because God had already given the victory. The sound rose. Faith exploded. And the walls came down. Not by power, not by might, but by faith. And Joshua knew the battle was never about the walls. It was about trust. So today, whatever stands before you, remember this. Faith still brings walls down. Let's begin with the story. The story of Joshua, the walls that faith brought down. Courage and conquest. Prologue, a promise waiting to be claimed. The wilderness stretched endlessly under a burning sun. For 40 years, a nation had wandered, eating manna from heaven, drinking water from rocks, and living under the shadow of a promise not yet fulfilled. The generation that had doubted was gone, buried beneath desert sands. Now, a new generation stood on the edge of destiny. At their head stood Joshua. He was not the loudest voice in Israel, not the most imposing figure, but he carried something greater than strength, unshakable faith. He had seen the Red Sea split. He had stood at the foot of Sinai. He had watched his mentor Moses speak with God as a man speaks with his friend. And now, Moses was gone. The weight of leadership fell upon Joshua like a mantle of fire. One night, as the camp rested under a blanket of stars, a voice broke through the silence, not heard by the ears, but felt deep within his spirit. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them. Joshua's heart trembled, but not with fear. With awe. Be strong and courageous. The voice continued. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for I am with you wherever you go. That was all he needed.
O Lord, look upon our suffering. How long must we endure this sorrow?
Lord, how do I lead them now? Be strong and courageous.
Crossing into destiny. The Jordan River stood between Israel and their promise, wide, deep, and raging with spring floods. It was not a gentle crossing. It was an obstacle designed to intimidate. But Joshua had learned something powerful. Obstacles are often the stage where God reveals His glory. He commanded the priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, straight into the water. No hesitation. No backup plan. The moment their feet touched the river, the water stopped. Not slowed. Not reduced. Stopped. The river rose into a heap upstream, leaving dry ground beneath their feet. One by one, tribe by tribe, family by family, the people crossed over. This was no ordinary migration. This was a declaration. God was still with them. And if God was with them, no wall, no army, no city could stand against them. The city of impossibility. Jericho stood like a giant before them. Its walls were not just barriers. They were symbols of fear. Massive, fortified, layered with stone and strength. It was said that chariots could ride across the top. To conquer Jericho by human strategy would require siege, starvation tactics, or overwhelming force. Israel had none of those. But Joshua didn't look at the walls. He looked to God. And God gave him a strategy so strange, so unconventional, it defied logic. You shall march around the city. Not once. Not as a show of force. But silently. Daily. For 6 days. 7 priests would carry trumpets. The ark would go before them. Soldiers would march, but no one would speak. No war cry. No threats. No battle noise. Just obedience. The test of silence. Day 1. The army marched around Jericho. Once. The people of Jericho watched from the walls, confused, amused, perhaps even mocking. No attack came. Israel returned to camp. Day 2. The same thing. March. Silence. Return. Day 3. Day 4. Day 5. Nothing changed. No cracks in the walls. No signs of weakness. Just footsteps in the dust. And silence. By day 6, the test was no longer about Jericho. It was about faith. Would they trust God when nothing seemed to be happening? Would they obey when the
Lord,
strategy made
show
no
me how to
sense?
conquer this city.
Joshua's voice
We
echoed
shall
through the
march
camp.
ourselves one step.
Do not shout. Do not speak. Not until the day I tell you. Silence became their discipline. Obedience became their weapon.
This
The
makes no
seventh day,
sense.
when faith
We should
speaks.
be fighting
The seventh day
are
dawned
fighting.
differently. There was a
How?
tension in the air.
with
A
obedience.
sense that something unseen was about to break. Joshua rose early. This time, they wouldn't march once. They would march 7 times. Around
Not
the
a
city.
word.
Again, and again, and again. By the
How many
6th lap,
times now?
the sun burned high, sweat dripped, legs ached.
One more.
But still, they walked. The walls still stood. But something was shifting, not in the city. In the spirit. The final lap. As they completed the 7th circle, Joshua raised his
Today
hand.
feels
The
different.
priests lifted their trumpets.
Today I'll get this one
The
fake.
people stood still. For the first time in 7 days, Joshua gave the command. Shout! For the Lord has given you the city. Not, will give, has given. Before the walls fell. Before the victory was visible. That is faith. The sound that shook stone. The trumpets blasted. A sound sharp and piercing. Then the people shouted, not with doubt, not with fear, but with absolute certainty. A roar of faith. A cry of victory. And then, the ground trembled. The walls shook. Cracks split through stone like lightning. Massive structures that had stood for generations collapsed. Not partially. Not strategically. Completely. The impossible had happened. Not by swords. Not by strength. But by faith-fueled obedience. Courage and conquest. With the walls down, Israel surged forward. This was the moment where faith met action. God had given the victory, but the people still had to step into it. They entered the city, not as wanderers, but as conquerors. Jericho fell. Not because Israel was strong, but because God is faithful. The deeper lesson. The fall of Jericho was not just a military victory. It was a spiritual revelation. It taught Israel, and generations to come, that faith does not require visible proof. Obedience is more powerful than strategy. God's ways are higher than human logic. Silence can be a weapon when guided by trust. Victory begins in the spirit before it appears in reality. Joshua understood something most people miss. The battle is not won when the walls fall. It is won when faith refuses to doubt. The courage to trust the process. Imagine the internal struggle. Soldiers trained for battle, told to march silently. Warriors ready to fight, told to wait. A nation eager for victory, told to trust a process that looked foolish. But that is where courage is born. Not in loud victories, but in quiet obedience. Joshua didn't just lead an army. He led a people into spiritual maturity. When walls still stand. There are moments in life when the walls don't fall immediately. When prayers seem unanswered. When obedience feels unrewarded. Jericho teaches this. Just because nothing is happening outwardly, doesn't mean nothing is happening. Every step around that city was weakening something unseen. Every silent march was building spiritual pressure. Until one moment, everything changed. The legacy of Joshua. Joshua's story didn't end at Jericho. It was only the beginning of a life defined by courage. He would go on to lead Israel into multiple victories, dividing the promised land among the tribes. But his greatest legacy was not land. It was faith in action. At the end of his life, he stood before the people and declared, "Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." That was the heart of a true leader. Not just conquering cities, but anchoring generations in faith. The walls in your life. Jericho is more than a story. It is a mirror. Everyone faces walls. Fear, doubt, delay, opposition, limitations. They stand tall, intimidating, unmovable. But the message of Joshua is clear. Walls do not fall because they are weak. They fall because God is strong. When you walk in faith. When you obey even when it doesn't make sense. When you trust God's voice over your logic. You step into a power that can bring down any wall. Not by might. Not by human strategy. But by divine authority. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to trust God anyway. Conquest is not about fighting harder. It is about believing deeper. And when faith rises, walls fall.
The walls in your life. Jericho is more than a story. It is a mirror. A mirror that faces wall. Everyone faces walls. Fear, doubt, delay, opposition. Limitations. They stand tall, intimidating, unmovable. When you walk in faith, when you obey even when it doesn't make sense, you step into a power that can bring down any wall. Not by might, not by human strategy, but divine authority. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to trust God anyway. Conquest is not about fighting harder. It is about believing deeper. And when faith rises, walls fall.
Walls do not fall because they are weak. They fall because God is strong.
And the river stood high. A promise filled the horizon. Beneath an open sky.
Kindly subscribe to the channel for more unique messages like this from Daystar Art Studio. Like, comment, and hit the subscribe button.